My name is Samantha McManus. I'm interviewing Gene Morgenstern on March 28, 2017 at the Sparta Public Library in Sparta, Illinois. Where and when were you born?
Well, I was born on May the 12th, 1928, on a dirt road about 5 miles west of DuQuoin, Illinois. This road was probably was used from the time Illinois was first coming into existence between the towns of Pinckneyville and DuQuoin. It was a well-traveled road back in those days, and my father owned 80 acres of farm and did farming, and my grandfather lived down the road and with about an 80-acre farm and at that time, and we had a nice place there evidently, and later on the farm was sold for mining.
Who are your parents and what are their occupations?
Well, my parents were Edward and Philip. Edward Philip and Sybil Grace Morgenstern, and I was named after my father as Edward. I was an Edward Eugene, but it ended up being called Gene all my life, and I really didn't realize I had a first name of Edward, you know. So it makes a person believe if they're going to name a child something, they ought to call him by his name, you know. So I never was a junior because I didn't have my dad's middle name. But I've always wished from day one that I'd have been a junior, had the same name. That would have been a lot easier, but I don't have it. My mother was also came from the same area, and they were all farmers. This was all the farming community back at the turn of the century, the turn of the 1900s, and it was all farming. And but they didn't know at that particular time, but most of the ground had coal underneath it at that time too.
Who are your siblings?
Well, I have a brother and a sister. I'm the youngest of the three. My brother was a Kenneth, which is, and he's 8 years older than I am, and he graduated from Pinckneyville High School and during the Depression area, and had a very hard time finding work during this particular time, and finally had a chance of getting on at Curtis Wright in St. Louis. And Curtis Wright at St. Louis was building aircraft and they didn't know at that time, for World War II. So when World War II broke in 1942, he was working there, and he immediately volunteered for the Air Force, and he went into what they call the Army Air Corps at that time. And so he ended up spending 3 years during World War II in the Army Air Corps. My sister was 3 years younger than my brother, and 5 years older than I am. And she went to the University of Illinois, went to college, and became a teacher at Pinckneyville High School.
What were you doing before you joined the service?
I was a coal miner. I had, I'll give a little history on this. It seems like that when I started high school, Pinckneyville High School, I started Pinckneyville High School in 1942. And when I started there, war was only about 6 to 8 months old. And so all the time we were going to high school, it was wartime. So we were very restricted on, travel and all this, what you could do during this time. So all the time I was thinking about, well, when I get to be a senior, or when I graduate from Pinckneyville, I'm going to go in the Air Force. Army Air Corps. At that time it was Army Air Corps. That's what I wanted, Army Air Corps. That's what my brother was in. So I think I'd like to do that too. But the war ended in August of, it would have been 45, and I was just starting my senior year. So my senior year, there was no war going on. So when I got out of high school, all these young guys were coming out of the service back out, and the jobs were pretty slim for anybody coming out of high school, and I didn't want to go to college. So I did find a job in Marissa, Illinois at a coal mine. So I worked 2 years at a coal mine in Marissa, Illinois. And it finally, the work there became less and less, and it required that he was going to close the mine down. Well, he hadn't quite closed it yet when I just happened to be in Piggyville one afternoon and ran into a recruiter on the square. And he was talking about he said, well, how about going to the Air Force? I said, the Air Force is a good place to be in, he says. He was recruiting for the Air Force. Now, this is 1948. Air Force was only 1 year old. The Air Force became a new service in 1947, so it was 1 year old. So this gentleman talked me into joining the Air Force. So here I joined the Air Force. Next thing I knew, I was at West Frankfort, Illinois, being sworn in, taking a small physical, which was very light. And next thing I knew, I was being sworn in the next day. And lo and behold, I was in the Air Force. And they said, well, you're going to have to take basic training at Wichita Falls, Texas, Shepherd Air Force Base. So they put us on a train this next morning, heading for Wichita Falls, Texas. Well, we had to go through the way of St. Louis, Missouri to get to Wichita Falls, Texas. So I asked, on the way, we got stopped in Mount Vernon, pulled into a siding in Mount Vernon, the train did. This is by train, we were traveling by train, and pulled in the side, and they were staying there for quite some time, and the conductor came through and says, we're stopped here for some time. We're waiting on the presidential train to come through. This was a President of the United States train was coming through Mount Vernon. This was in 1948. Harry Truman had been on a huge campaign all the way to California, from Washington to California during I guess August and September, whatever I guess. I don't know how long it had been going on. But he was coming back through there. So we were on the siding waiting for his train to come on through. And so when the train came in there, it stopped right beside ours. And the conductor said, if you want to see the President of the United States, you can come off. You can get off here and watch him. He's going to give a little speech. And so we got off the train. Here I've been in the service one day, and here I'm meeting the Commander-in-Chief himself. One day in the service, you know. The President of the United States. So here he got off the train. We watched Harry Truman make about a 10-minute speech on the back of the train that morning in Mount Vernon, Illinois. So that was one of the highlights of my career, seeing the President of the United States the first day of it was the first full day of my term. We went on down to like I say, we went on down to Wichita Falls and took our basic training, which wasn't bad. Basic training. The Air Force was still using a lot of the Army tactics, but they were, since it was 1 year old, the Air Force was starting to get their own, doing things like the Air Force way. It still took a while to do that because they had all this old Army background that they had to go through. So anyway, I got my basic training all finished, and after the basic training, then I headed for. Now I wanted a base. I wanted to be trained in something. So they like to train you in something. So I was trained as at this time they called it aircraft sheet metal workers, and this was actually in commercial line. That would be a commercial sheet metal. So they said, yeah, you can do that if you want to do that. We'll send you to you'll send you to Rantoul, Illinois, to Chanute Air Force Base. Chanute, and so I took training there to become an aircraft. I got into the aircraft sheet metal portion of it. So that's how that started my career in the Air Force. Was in the metalworking field. I may have some more stories to tell about metalworking and all that later on.
How long did you serve?
Well, I served 21 years, and and this was continuous serving because I never did have a break. All 21 full years. After I got through sheet metal school at Rantoul, I was sent to Rapid City, South Dakota, to That was the bomb squadron, 718th Bomb Squadron. Now this would be in 1949, and they had just, the bomb squadron a year previous to this had just come out of Alaska. They'd been in Alaska for a while. They settled in Rapid City, and they were flying B-29s. Now this is the aircraft that was used to drop the atomic bomb on Japan. So here I was working on some pretty good aircraft, B-29 bombers. And I was just very fortunate to be in the bomb squadron. So this squadron had, there was about 3 of us what I call sheet metal workers. And my boss was a tech sergeant, had served during World War II, and so he knew all about battle damage on aircraft, and so we talked, and I found out a lot by just talking with him over about a year all the time I was there. He was a great guy. Shortly after that, the world situation started escalating, and Russia started acting up, and we thought Russia was going to be coming to the United States with aircraft. We thought Russia had an aircraft that could. The United States had already known this ahead of time, and so they were already building an aircraft that was able to fly to Russia and return, drop the bombs and return. And that was the B-36. So lo and behold, we were given, within a year after I got to the 718th Bomb Squadron, here come our B-36s. A huge bomber this was compared to the B-29. And so they changed the maintenance situation. Instead of me being in the 718th Bomb Squadron, we went to what we call the field maintenance squadrons, where all the sheet metal workers from all the bomb squadrons would be together. And so this B-36 required approximately 75 sheet metal workers, because the aircraft was made from 2 different kinds of metal. One of them was aluminum and one of them was magnesium. Most of the areas on the plane that wasn't pressurized and wasn't a structural part of the aircraft was magnesium. And the reason they did this was because to get the lightness, it was a lot lighter material. The B-36 was a 6 engines. There were 6 prop-driven engines, and they were pusher engines, which means they would push the aircraft that were on the back of the wing, pushers, they call them. Later on, they modified them and put 2 jets on the wings, so we would have 6 turning and 4 burning on those planes on that later on. But anyway, the plane was capable of flying into Russia, drop bombs, and return on one trip. Now nowadays that doesn't sound like much since you got in-flight refueling at all. But that days we didn't have in-flight refueling, and they thought the Russians were actually going to be coming our way, and we was going to make sure we could take the bombs to them. Anyway, I was assigned to here's where my career really started blooming, I guess you'd say. I could met this one gentleman by the name of Bill Hiller. He'd been in the Navy during World War II, and then he'd come into the Air Force a little later on. And he immediately wanted me on his crew. We had what we call crews, 2-man crews. And on this bomber, you had to have 2-man crews to work the metal, because if you were patching a hole or something, you had to have somebody inside the aircraft and one on the outside. One would be driving rivets, the other guy would be bucking rivets. So you need the crew of 2 people. So I got on his crew, and I was by this time I'd made corporal, and he was a staff sergeant. So he gave me a little clues on what was going on. So he and I worked together on the B-36s for many, I guess that's it, many years, probably a couple of years. In about 54, he got transferred. He went to Korea. And I still stayed there. But anyway, promotions all brought this on too, see. And one highlight in all this was 1950. We was called to the base theater, and the base commander was at that time, gave a little speech on the world situation has changed dramatically overnight. He says, we have now gone, the United States has now gone into Korea, and we are sending personnel into Korea. We've already got people in Korea, and we will be fighting we will be fighting the North Koreans. And so the Korean War had started, and he said anybody's enlistment will be extended 1 year. So here I was with my enlistment was just about to end. I had 1 year to serve, and here he was going. I had a year coming. That made me serve 2 years rather than 1 year. So I started on. I went on to when my 1 year, when my enlistment really came up in 51. I'd made buck sergeant by this time. And so things were looking a little good, and I said, you know, maybe, and the Korean War was still going on. Maybe I better just stay in. I'll try for 3 more years. See, at that time you could enlist for 3. So I stayed for 3 more years, and when I'd got these 3 in, I was a staff sergeant, going up for tech. So here are the ranks. When I got my 6 years. 6 years in, it was good. I said, you know, I can't turn this down now. I was only 14 years away from retirement. So here it was. That really sucked. Really, I really had to go on with the rest of it. From then on, the rest of it was a job. It was always a job. There was never, in the Air Force, it was always a job. It was a job. It wasn't, there was never any, we had, once in a while, we'd have some stuff where you're policing this stuff up and show I had to get dressed up and do this or that, but very seldom I had to do much of that. They worried about your job. The Air Force, if you could keep your airplanes flying, that's what they were proud of. That's what they wanted. So we were like the old Army, where they did a lot of cleaning up and doing a lot of polish and all. But I will tell one little story about basic training. I'll tell that one little one. Remember the Army? The Air Force was only 1 year old. They gave us all this equipment, clothing, threw us these brown shoes and told us to polish them black. Within 3 days they got to be black and shiny. Black and shiny. And then they said, how are we going to do that? He said, go to BX, get some black polish, and start polishing them. So that's just one little one. I'll throw that one in. But anyway, the Air Force was a great organization to be in. Like I said, right after I joined up, at the Rapids, I'm still at Rapid City with B-36s. And after I enlisted my second enlistment now, this is my second re-enlistment. I took 6 years. I was going to get a big re-enlistment bonus. Nowadays it'd be chicken feed. Back then we thought it was pretty good size, but now it would be chicken feed. You know, the bonus would be. But anyway, it was really very little. I enlisted for 6 years, and I was close to tech sergeant. I made tech right after I re-enlisted. I made tech, so here was a tech sergeant. And now we've got to remember, there's only one more rank. So that's all I could go to. Master was the top at this time. Later on, they created 2 more ranks and sergeants. But anyway, after I made tech, I was immediately pulled. They said, "Oh, we're going to pull you for overseas." So I was sent overseas to Alaska. Alaska was the overseas at this time. 1954 was Alaska. Was called. So it wasn't a state. Alaska was not a state. So my wife and I, we got everything together and shipped. You know, at this time they shipped us all up to Alaska, and she and I went on a boat together up to Alaska, and I shipped my car to Alaska, shipped all the stuff I had to Alaska, and didn't know what to expect other than we knew they had a lot of cold weather. We were just lucky this all happened. My shipping up was in April, in May, so everything had warmed up. So I got there when it was warm weather. And when I got there, it was I'd left bombers, and this was my last term in my whole career in the Air Force was bombers. That ended my bomber career. I was never with the Strategic Air Command, which was bombers. From then on, I was involved with fighter type aircraft, I would say, more than bombers, all smaller aircraft. In fact, Alaska at that time had F-89s, which were a plane, and what the world situation was by this time was we were still worried about Russia coming to bring in their bombers, and they figured if they were going to come to us, to the United States with bombers, they would probably come over the poles. They'd have to come over the pole over Canada and over Alaska, towards Alaska, and come over that way. That's the way they would come, because I guess that's the shortest route to come over. And so they started building up the dew line in Alaska real heavily. They already had a small one up in there at this time, but they started building that up real heavily. And so our planes in Fairbanks were capable of shooting down oncoming planes if they came in with rockets. At that time we had rockets. Instead, we had rockets on the tips of the wings. So I was with an F-89 outfit. The gentleman that met me at Alaska when I first got there was a tech sergeant too, and he was getting ready to retire or go back to the States. So he had a lot of good words for us, and he found us a place to live. We had to live in Fairbanks itself for about 2 months, because, and I don't know, the military, rank has its privileges. The more rank you got, the higher rank you got, the quicker you get things done. And same way in housing, if there's housing available. Well, tech sergeant doesn't have as much rank as a master sergeant, so all the housing, we had to wait a while for something to open up for us. So we waited about 2 months, and we finally got in before the winter time started, and good thing it did. And I'll talk a little about winter in Alaska, and then I'll talk a little about summer in Alaska. I'll tell about the job in Alaska. Winter in Alaska's. The places we stayed in was base housing in Alaska. They were all built in apartments of 4 apartments to a building, and there would be buildings. You'd be on one side, there'd be one at the end, and one at the other facing you. It'd be open on one end, and you could drive all the way around inside it. Your automobile, you'd drive your automobile inside it. Not in the building, but inside the parking lot. Inside that parking lot, you would have a parking space where you would park your automobiles. I mean, you could walk out of your house, right to your car. But every one of the parking spaces would have a post, and on this post would be an electrical outlet. Now you had to have electrical outlet there, or you'd never start an automobile in the wintertime. You could, no way. So every one of those had electrical outlets. Yeah, also the houses were all steam heated from a central heating spot, which was, and they all had doors. In other words, when you entered the first door, you always had another door before you went into the building itself. You always had to have a dead air space in between them doors, so you had to keep that air out. Now we're talking about extremely cold weather. Fairbanks had that. Fairbanks weather is cold in the winter and pretty warm in the summer. Winter time will start in the end of September. You'll get the first little snow, and that snow will be on the roads until it thaws. And it don't thaw on anything in the winter. It will be there. And it will gradually get colder and colder and colder. And it generally, by November, by Thanksgiving, you're well below zero. Now, to start out with, there's very little wind in Fairbanks. Fairbanks had very little wind. That's one good. Maybe a mile or two wind. Very little. It kind of laid in a valley, and so the winds were all above, I guess. We had no wind, so it means that's the reason it would get so cold down in that valley. And by December, the daylights had ended. Your daylight was gone too. We'd only have about maybe 1 hour of daylight on about Christmas time. In the And that daylight, the sun would just barely come up on the tip of the horizon and dip down. And the temperatures would range, they would range from anywhere from 20 below to 40, 45 below. Lots of times we'd go to bed at night and they'd give temperatures that, on the television. We did have television back then. And they'd give the television and say, oh, Anchorage is running, right now Anchorage is 20 below. Fairbanks, we're running 45 below right now, 45 below in Fairbanks. It's 20 below in Anchorage. Cut Point Barrow. Now Point Barrow is 450 miles north of us. It's up on the Arctic Ocean. Point Barrow now is 35 below with a 35 knot wind off of the ocean. 35 below with a 35 mile knot wind. Now that would be a terrible thing, that wind. And that's a freezing right there. But we'd be colder, but they'd be a lot colder because of that wind and all. But anyway, that's how the temperature would run. Now, of a morning you'd go down, the only way you could start that car, at that temperatures, at those temperatures, an automobile couldn't set out over 2 hours or you'd never start it. You couldn't even have a die-hard battery that would turn it over in that length of time. At 45 below zero, 2 hours. Oil would be thick. Regular oil, you couldn't turn it. You had to have 5-weight oil, at least 5-weight oil. You had to have your car winterized. Number one, you had to have it. Let's see. You had to have the rear end had to have a special lightweight oil. Your transmission, if you didn't have an automatic, you had a straight shifted transmission, had to have a lightweight oil. Your wheel bearings had to be packed with lightweight grease, or you couldn't turn the wheel. The wheel would freeze. Couldn't even turn the wheel. So that all had to be done to go. If you had, and this was the days before tubeless tires, so all tires had inner tubes. And inner tubes had to be natural rubber, could not be synthetic rubber. If they were synthetic, at 30 below zero you would have punctures in them. So you had to have natural rubber tires. So the first winter I struggled with that. I didn't believe that until it gets 30 below, and I found that out real fast. So I had to have my tires all changed on my car for that. But I always started my car because you had to have a head bolt heaters or circulating heaters. You had to keep that water warm. That was the reason for the plug-ins. Also kept my oil. I had a hot lamp that went underneath my oil pan, keep my oil on. Had a trickle charger from a battery. Batteries will freeze too. At that temperature, will freeze. So you have to have a trickle charger for batteries. So but yeah, we were flying airplanes. At that time. Now the daytimes, when I said 45, the daytimes it may warm up to 40 below zero. And we could go through a spell in December and January of 2 weeks. It'd be like this for 2 weeks in a row. And then it'd warm up. It'd warm up to 30 below. That felt like feel like a spring day. And then people laugh and say, you know what, can't imagine that, but it does. It starts to feeling a lot warmer at 30 below than with the Air Force issued parkas for this. You had pants you could wear. You could slip those on. And they encourage you, and bunny boots, that was another thing. We had bunny boots. That's a shoe that's made from felt, about ½ inch felt. And they would definitely keep your feet warm. And they encourage you to wear them with civilian clothes. You could wear that stuff with civilian clothes, that parka with civilian clothes. Because they don't want any frostbiting. That's why they don't want you to get frostbitten. Okay, that's the winter. We go, anyway, my job there. The last of my job, okay. As it turned out, they were overstaffed with tech sergeants. I was one of about 5, I guess. It took a little while to rotate these other people out, and after about 1.5 years, I finally got the shop, so I finally became in charge of the shop. And like I say, we only had the F-89s there all that particular time, and we had some other aircraft. They were SA-16s, which they were used. We also had smaller aircraft that they used right around the base, and also these sites, they always used small aircraft. A lot of their aircraft always had a lot of the aircraft had skis on them. I'm talking about any aircraft that would be used to take out supplies to the sites. C-47s and all. They had 2 or 3 C-47s that had skis. Now these sites would not have no way to plow their snow, so they'd have to land in the snow with these skis, with these aircraft. And so my years in there was after most of these other techs got out of the way, rotated back, I became in charge of the shop and ended up with the shop. And I had about 6 or 8 sheet metal workers, and this was a good aircraft to work on. We had very little work. Really, I didn't have a lot of work to do on the aircraft. It was the plane did not break. The metal was stronger and all, and it was really a good airplane for that. My term ended there in '58. Came back to Orlando, Florida. Do you want me to go ahead with what's happening? Is this all right, what I'm doing? Okay, all right. All right, I'll continue on then. I'll try to rush it. I went to Orlando, Florida. Ended up in Orlando, and right now, right at the present day, the base was called McCoy Air Force Base. The airport, if you fly in and out of Orlando right now, that's where the Air Force Base was. That was McCoy Air Force Base when I was there, in 1958. And they had the same kind of aircraft, same as I had in Alaska, very same kind. And I was in a squadron now. I wasn't in the field maintenance, I was in a squadron there. And my squadron also, I had a machinist, and I had a painter. I had about 3 guys. I had about three units. So I'm starting to picking up more other than my career, other shops really. And these guys are real good. I have good grateful guys, and we got transferred. The whole squadron got transferred to, in about 3 years. We got transferred up to Westover Air Force Base, Massachusetts. And what we were doing up there, we started protecting the United States in case Russia brought some planes over the Atlantic Ocean. We were going to meet them up there. And we picked up. We left our F-89s and went to 102s, Delta Darts. We went to supersonic aircraft. These are high-speed aircraft, 102s. And we flew them up there for about 2 years, and then I got transferred after that. I got shipped on up to Maine. I was up in Maine there, and went on up to Maine. And up in Maine, we picked up 106 aircraft, which was like a 102, a Delta Dart. It was built like it, but it was a much faster aircraft. And there's where I had, well, let's see, I've had five or six shops up there. I had all the shops up there. Only I probably had about 20 people and all total working at all these shops. And so there's where I made master sergeant. I made master up there. And then I went to the NCO Academy. That always helped out too. There's where they teach you how to become real sharp NCOs, at the academy. And then later on I made E8, which was a super master sergeant, and I stayed up there for almost 6 years. And there's another cold climate, lots of snow. Maine, that's the very tip of Maine. And Loring Air Force Base, and they also had bombers there. They had B-36s, but I wasn't involved in the bombers. I was involved in the fighters. I was in the fighter squadron, and we had a commander called. We called him Black Bart, and he was a hotshot pilot. I'd just call him a hotshot pilot, and he was a. What I liked about him is he was a kind of a guy that if you kept them planes flying, that's all he cared about. I mean, if the plane was flying, fine, take off. Many times he'd come in there and we'd have a little inspection and we'd do well in it. And on about a Thursday afternoon, he says, "See you Monday." Well, we always had planes on alert. So he couldn't take the ones off. Up there, it started up there. We always had planes on alert. We had four planes that was on alert in case Russia should be coming our way. And now we're using a different. We're not using rockets anymore. We're using atomic weapons. These are atomic weapons. when they shoot these, when they come out of when they come out of the belly of the plane, they're going to hit what they hit. They're going to hit them, and they're atomic type. And so they're really important weapons to be held. So these planes were first class. So anybody that didn't have anything to do with all this was relieved. You know, I didn't say everybody, the whole squadron took off or anything. So this that went on. Like I say, I was there until I made senior master. When I made senior master, I was no longer authorized. See, the military, you've got to be authorized for certain spots. You just can't say, well, I'd like to go to Scott Air Force Base. You can't say that because Scott Air Force Base has got to have a spot there that you're authorized to be in. Now, what I mean by authorized, from the day you went into the service, you're authorized to do. You've got a number there. You've got a number as the basic guy. Then I went to school. I got a number. I'm a sheet metal worker. That's a number. And when the lower rank you are, they can always handle a lot of those. But the higher rank you get, once you get up into the sergeant's area, you got to be authorized on those spots, or they don't want you there. You got to be authorized there. So when I made E8, I was not authorized on my base. So they said, we're going to send you to Vietnam. I said, fine. So I went and took a physical. I couldn't pass the physical. I'd been back in '58. They detected a heart murmur. I had a heart murmur. This was that was on my 4th re-enlistment, and I'd been to a few doctors in the Air Force around different bases, and they come to the conclusion they didn't think it was what it was. Yeah, you got a murmur. We don't know why you got one, but it has developed while you've been in. But we don't think it's too bad. That's what the motivator said. When I went to Vietnam, they wouldn't let me go, so I thought it was too bad. So they said, we'll have to reevaluate you. So when they reevaluated me, it turns out that they said, well, we probably could do that. We still don't think it's that bad. So the next thing I got to Vietnam. He said, we'll send you to Vietnam. We're going to send you to Thailand. So that Thailand was in the war too. We were fighting. So he sent me to Thailand. In Thailand, I went there in '67. And the outfit I joined there was a dual outfit. It was a bomber. It's a bombing outfit, and it was a recon outfit. Two outfits on the base. They were flying F-4s, which were manufactured right up here at McDonnell Douglas in St. Louis, Missouri. That's where that plane was manufactured at. The day I reached the Udorn Air Force Base in Thailand, and Udorn was situated right at the tip of Thailand, right across the river from Vinh Thanh, Laos. And they were bombing North Vietnam. We were only about, one time they took off our base in 20 minutes, they were over North Vietnam. They were Hanoi, bombing them. And then they would send the recons out to take the pictures of what we bombed. And then someplace along the line said, well, here's where we need to bomb next. So that went on for the whole year I was there. It was in '67 and '68, which went rather rapidly. I was surprised because I had no family there. That's the first time I had to really leave my family in the States. And so it went by rather rapidly. That's 2 years. And these bombers, we had, there was a lot, I'll talk about that later on if you want to hear something about Vietnam and the bombing of Hanoi. But that's about a little bit of a fast revision of where I've been in the Air Force.
Is there anything you feel like we haven't discussed or should be added to this interview?
Well, I don't know. I could talk a little bit I could talk a little bit about Vietnam. I guess what a job was and what it was a job. Although it was not in Vietnam, and it was an important job because we were bombing the north. We were bombing the Hanoi. And our base also had a lot of, we were close to Laos, and Laos was, there was not supposed to be any United States Air Force people in Laos. That was a neutral country. But anyway, it seemed like, let's put it this way, it seemed like it was a, maybe you could say seemed like it was useless war. Especially when I can remember. Here's some of the points when it would get you to thinking this way. While I was in Vietnam, I made 2 trips into Clark Field, Philippines. Clark Field, the Philippines, was a staging area for all bodies that were brought out of Vietnam. It was one of the staging areas. There was a couple of them over there, but Clark was one of the bigger ones. And when you'd see it all down on the fly line, all these metal boxes, which included bodies, you knew you was in a terrible situation. And every time the 2 times I was at Clark, you could see this, and it gets you. It's just kind of a terrible situation. Now we in the Air Force didn't see this. We didn't see people getting killed like that, you know. But I mean, this is another little situation was one of my trips into Clark. We flew into Thompson Newt, which Thompson Newt, it was in South Vietnam. In Thompson Newt, we picked up some U.S. servicemen, soldiers. This one got down. He was flying into Philippines. He had his rifle. He was carrying his rifle aboard the plane, and he was just shaking. And he said he'd been under fire most of the night. And he said, "I was glad to get on this plane and get out of there." He said, "I was glad to get out of there." And I said, I could see immediately that here's what the Army. I tell you, it was a shame. The Army put up with a lot. They surely did. There was no doubt about it in those areas. So my heart really goes out to the Army and Marines over there. We Air Force don't always have to have those conditions to put up. They do. They put up with a lot that we didn't have to put up with.
This concludes our interview. Thank you for taking part in this interview, and thank you for your service.
You mean?